All right, so are you ready to dive into this Moon Dong-ju debate? Seems like everyone in the Korean baseball world has an opinion.
Oh yeah, it's gotten pretty heated, and I think it's interesting because it goes way beyond just, looking at his ERA or, like
Yeah.
strikeouts and stuff.
No, it's not just about the numbers.
Exactly, like it gets into how we think about talent, the
Yeah.
whole like weight of expectations, and even like fandom in Korean baseball.
Yeah, and we've got some spicy source material for this deep dive.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so we found this podcast episode from Donja,
Huh.
and they're known for their like no holds barred discussions. And this one, Moon Dong-ju is no different.
I mean, that's what makes this so fascinating, right? It's not just like, will he be a star or not, but like, what does success even mean? Like in baseball, and like, how much influence do fans and the media have, like, on a player's trajectory?
Totally. And so in this episode, we've got two commentators kind of going at it. They've got two very different views on Moon Dong-ju.
Okay, lay it on me.
Okay, so first up, you got commentator Park Chan-sung, and he is like firmly in the pro Moon camp.
Oh,
Like he's pointing to his raw talent, like that blazing fastball. It's been clocked at over 93 miles per hour.
yeah. I mean, you can't teach that.
Right. And he thinks, Moon just needs time and the right support, to work through the typical growing pains.
Sure, every young pitcher goes through that.
Exactly.
Okay, so who's the other side?
All right. So then you've got analyst Kim Banday, and he's a little more skeptical.
Okay.
He's like looking at Moon's 4 years in the league and saying like, okay, where are the results?
He brings up a good point. I mean, pro baseball is a business,
Exactly.
and it's a results-driven business.
Totally. And he points to like, inconsistent performances, issues with control, and there are even like whispers about his work ethic.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really juicy because Korean baseball fans, they are like notoriously passionate.
Yeah.
They're not holding back on Moon Dong-ju. Like some are fiercely defending him, saying he's the best pitcher the Eagles have developed since Ryu Hyun-jin.
Wow, high praise.
Right. And then others are just like completely losing patience with him.
Yeah, 4 years is a long time to wait for a pitcher to develop.
Totally. And, that passion is something we should unpack here.
Yeah.
We see these intense fan reactions in sports all over the world, but there's something kind of particular about Korean baseball culture.
Oh, yeah.
Like, these fans are so deeply invested in their teams and players,
Right.
and they are not afraid to voice their opinions, positive or negative.
It's almost like a family member, that they feel that close to the team.
Yeah, exactly. And some fans have even dubbed themselves Dongju moms, which I'm learning has some pretty interesting like cultural implications in Korea.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So in Korean society, mom, like
Yeah.
used in this way, can imply like a very overprotective kind of support, often to the point of like overlooking flaws. It can also be kind of negative, implying like interference or even blind loyalty.
So it's not just about cheering for Moon. It's like about defending him against any kind of criticism,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's
Right.
valid.
Exactly. And that raises some questions about, how that kind of fandom impacts a young player like Moon.
Right. Is it helpful or is it just adding more pressure?
Totally. And maybe even creating like unrealistic expectations.
Right. And then there's the whole Asian Games gold medal situation.
Well, yeah, that's a big one.
So on one hand, it's a huge accomplishment for Moon to be part of that winning team.
Right. Of course, representing your country and winning gold, like that's amazing.
For sure. But the critics are saying like, okay, that doesn't necessarily translate to success in the KBO, let alone the MLB.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different level of competition for sure.
Right. So you've got this tension between like a flash of brilliance on a national stage
Right.
and then the grind of a long season where the results haven't been as consistent.
And it makes you wonder, like, how much weight should we give to these different data points? Like, is the Asian Games gold a sign of things to come, or is it just an outlier?
Right. And to really understand that, I think we need to dig a little deeper into Moon's actual performance in the KBO.
Absolutely. I'm ready to dive into the stats.
Okay, so we've talked about Moon's fastball, but what about his other pitches? Like if he wants to be a successful starting pitcher, he can't just rely on one pitch.
Oh, for sure. He needs to develop a full arsenal to keep hitters guessing.
Exactly. And that's where the data can give us some insight. We can look at his pitch usage, the movement, his spin rates, all those like fancy metrics that can help us evaluate his development as a pitcher.
Yeah, it'll tell us if he's on the right track or if he needs to make some adjustments.
Exactly. And that brings us to another point of contention, the whole bullpen or starter
Wow.
debate.
Oh, yeah, this one's a classic.
So some fans think Moon's raw power would be best utilized coming out of the bullpen, in short bursts.
Where he can just like let it rip.
Exactly. But then others are worried that that would be like giving up too soon on his potential as a starter.
Right. Like, are we stunting his growth by putting him in the bullpen?
Exactly. And I think to really understand this, we need to like get beyond the hype and the hot takes and actually analyze what the data tells us about his strengths and weaknesses.
Totally. Like, if his fastball is truly elite, but his secondary pitches are lagging behind, that might suggest a different developmental path for him.
Right. And this debate is actually a microcosm of a larger trend in baseball, right? Like specializing versus developing a broader skill set.
Oh, absolutely.
And there are arguments to be made on both sides.
For sure. And the answer might not be the same for every player, right? It depends on their individual skills, their physical and mental makeup, and even the strategic needs of the team.
So is the criticism that Moon Dongju is facing like fair? Or is he being judged too harshly? I mean, that's a big question.
It is a big question, and that's exactly what we're trying to answer with this deep dive.
Right.
But to do that, we need to go beyond just like the surface level analysis and really delve into the nuances of his performance, his development, and, like the whole context of Korean baseball culture.
Right. And we can't forget about those passionate fans.
Oh, the Dongju moms.
The Dongju moms and everyone else who's so invested in his success.
They are a huge part of the story, and I think their opinions and expectations really shape the narrative around Moon Dongju.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And this deep dive is really a glimpse into that complex intersection of talent and fandom and cultural dynamics in the world of Korean baseball.
It's going to be a wild ride. So let's dig into those like juicy details you mentioned, that those fan comments and the specific criticisms that people are throwing at Moon.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, so I came across this comment and it just like perfectly captures the intensity of this whole debate.
Oh yeah, what does it say?
Okay, so roughly translated, it says, if Moon Dongju wasn't getting criticized, the team would still be in the dark ages.
So it's like they're saying the high expectations come with the territory. The team's doing better, so no more excuses for this young pitcher.
Right, and some are even more like pointed in their frustration.
Yeah.
Another comment I saw said, let's find out how many starts Moon Dongju has left.
Ooh, that's brutal.
Yeah.
It's like they're already counting down his days as a starter.
Yeah, I mean, it really illustrates that passion, but also that impatience,
Right.
These fans are invested. They want to see results now. And speaking of those Dongju moms, they're not just passively supporting him. They're actively pushing back against any, like, perceived negativity.
So it's not just like go Moon Day. It's like, don't you dare say anything bad about it.
Right, and that's where it gets a little tricky, Like, support is great, but this kind of, like, intense protectiveness can be a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it could actually hurt his growth in the long run.
Yeah.
If he's not allowed to, like, face constructive criticism and learn from his mistakes.
Exactly, and it also makes you think about fan culture in general,
Yeah.
Like, where's the line between supporting a player and feeling like you have a say in, like, every aspect of their career?
Yeah, it's a good point. And it's interesting that this term Dongju moms is so gendered,
Oh, totally.
It's like this tendency we see everywhere to dismiss passionate female fans.
Like they're just being emotional,
Oh.
They don't actually know anything about the sport.
Exactly. It's like their opinions are less valid because they're women. It's frustrating.
Yeah, it's a pattern we see in sports fandom all over the world, and it's not.
Okay, so let's talk about that Asian Games gold medal.
Okay.
It's a big achievement,
Right.
but we talk about how it needs context.
Right, because some critics are saying it's not a reliable indicator of his potential in the KBO or MLB.
Right, they're saying the competition wasn't as tough, and his low innings pitched in the regular season, raises some questions about his stamina and his durability.
Right, can he handle the grind of a full season?
Exactly, but on the flip side, his supporters point to the gold medal as proof that he can perform under pressure.
Oh, yeah, like he's got that big game mentality.
Right. So how do we reconcile these two viewpoints?
Well, I think we need to look beyond just wins and losses. We can compare Moon's performance to other young pitchers in the KBO or even pitchers at similar points in their careers in the MLB.
Yeah. Use those advanced stats to get a better picture.
Exactly. We can look at things like his strikeout to walk ratio, his WAP, his FIP, all those like fancy metrics that tell us more about his effectiveness.
Right. So instead of debating whether the Asian Games gold is a fluke or not, we can use data to get a more objective assessment of his progress.
Precisely. And that data can also help us with the whole bullpen or starter debate, If his fastball velocity is great, but he's struggling with command or developing those secondary pitches, that might suggest a bullpen role is a better fit.
Right, where he can just air it out and not worry about pacing himself for a full game.
Exactly. But before we jump to any conclusions, I think we need to be careful about those whispers about his work ethic.
Yeah, what's the deal with that? Are those just rumors, or is there something more to it?
Well, it's tough to say for sure.
Yeah.
We don't want to repeat unsubstantiated claims, especially if they could hurt his reputation. But what we can do is look for evidence. Like, are there reports from coaches or teammates? Has he said anything about it himself?
Yeah, we got to separate fact from fiction. And it's also important to remember that, different cultures have different approaches to training and work ethic.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So what might be perceived as a lack of effort could actually just be, a different style or a different approach to the game.
Exactly. And we need to be careful about making assumptions based on cultural stereotypes.
Okay, so we've talked about those fan reactions, the Asian Games gold medal, the whole bullpenner starter debate, and those whispers about his work ethic. But I'm curious, what do the pro-Moon people see in him? Like, what makes them so confident that he'll be a star?
Well, they see those flashes of brilliance, those games where he's just untouchable, striking everyone out, showing that electric stuff that made him such a highly touted prospect.
And they're basically saying, you can't teach that kind of arm talent. He just needs time to harness it.
Right, and they're not wrong. There are tons of pitchers who took a few years to figure things out, to develop their command and their mental game, and then they went on to have really successful careers.
But then you have the skeptics saying, like, potential doesn't win championships, you need results.
And that's the million-dollar question, How long do you wait for a player to reach their potential?
Right.
Is there a point where patience actually becomes a bad thing?
Yeah, and how do you measure that tipping point?
Right. These are questions that teams are grappling with all the time.
Especially when you consider the money they've invested in a young player like Moon.
Oh, yeah. They're not just hoping for potential. They want a return on their investment.
Right, and that adds another layer to this whole situation, Moon Dong-ju isn't just playing for himself. He's playing for the team, the city, the fans.
All those people who desperately want to see him succeed.
It's like he's carrying the weight of all those expectations every time he steps onto the mound.
And that pressure can be so intense, especially for a young guy who's still trying to find his way,
Okay, so we've laid out the battle lines here. Fans are divided, critics are skeptical, the Dongju moms are fiercely defending their guy. But what about Moon himself?
Yeah, where does he fit into all of this?
Like, what are his goals, his aspirations, his fears?
That's the human element that often gets lost in all the stats and the hype,
Yeah, it's easy to forget that, when we're talking about these players, like, they're real people.
Totally. And they have lives and feelings, outside of baseball.
Right. It's not all stats and wins and losses.
And I think it's important, especially in a deep dive like this, to remember the human element.
For sure. And in this case, we've got this young athlete who's being pulled in so many different directions. Fans want him to be this superstar. Critics are waiting for him to fail, and it's probably trying to block it all out and just focus on playing.
It can't be easy being in his shoes right now.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Okay, so nobody has a crystal ball or anything, but let's try to predict the future for a minute.
Okay.
What are some possible paths forward for Moon Dong-ju's career?
Well, the dream scenario for him and all the Dongju moms out there is that he becomes that dominant ace. He figures out his command, develops a reliable second pitch, maybe even adds a third one to keep hitters off balance.
He leads the Eagles to a championship,
Of course.
Becomes a national icon, maybe even makes it to the MLB someday.
It's definitely possible. He's got the talent, and if he puts it all together, who knows what he could achieve.
Right, but there are also some less optimistic scenarios. Right?
Yeah. Definitely, baseball is a tough business.
So what are some of those less rosy possibilities?
Well, he could end up being one of those guys who shows flashes of brilliance, but never quite reaches that next level. Yeah. Maybe he struggles with injuries, or the mental game just gets too tough, and he never really fulfills his potential.
That would be like the classic what-if story, right?
Totally heartbreaking for him and for all those fans who believed in him.
Yeah, or maybe he ends up being better suited for the bullpen.
Right, where that power fastball can really shine in those short bursts.
Right.
It might not be that, glamorous ace role that everyone's hoping for, but it could still be a very successful career.
Yeah, and it's funny because some fans might see that as a failure, like, oh, he couldn't cut it as a starter.
Right.
But in reality, lots of pitchers transition to the bullpen and have a ton of success.
Totally. And sometimes that change can actually take the pressure off and let them really thrive.
And we also can't forget about the possibility of injuries.
Oh, yeah. That's the tough reality of sports.
One bad pitch, one awkward movement, and it can all be over.
It's a good reminder to appreciate these athletes while we have them, you know?
Yeah.
You never know how long it's going to last.
So where do you land on all this? Like, what's your gut feeling about Moon Dongju's future?
It's tough to say for sure. It's still early in his career.
Yeah.
He's young, he's shown that he's got the talent, and he's got this huge fan base that's behind him.
Right. The Dongju moms are ready to ride.
They are definitely a force, but, I'm not ready to call him the next Ryu Hyunjin just yet.
So you're saying he still has a lot to prove?
I think so, and ultimately it's up to him,
Yeah.
He's the one who has to put in the work, stay focused, and block out all the noise, the good and the bad.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Moon Dongju, what's the big takeaway for our listeners?
I think it's a good reminder that talent is just one part of the equation,
Right.
To really succeed in anything, whether it's sports or whatever, you need so much more like resilience, dedication, mental toughness, the ability to learn from your mistakes, and even a little bit of luck.
And maybe a healthy dose of perspective.
Like, it's easy to get caught up in the hype and all the expectations, but we have to remember that these are people, with their own hopes and dreams and struggles.
Absolutely. And I think we also shouldn't underestimate the influence of fan culture.
Yeah.
The power of those Dongju moms and everyone who's invested in his success.
Right. Like, that passion can be a good thing, but it also needs to be balanced with some realism and understanding.
Exactly.
Moon Dongju's story is far from over. He's still writing his legacy. One pitch at a time.
And I think as fans, as analysts, as people who love the game, we have a role to play too.
Yep.
We should support these athletes, but we should do it in a way that's thoughtful, respectful, and informed.
Well said. This deep dive has been a wild ride,
It has.
We've got those passionate fans, the skeptical critics, those glimpses of brilliance, and then just a ton of uncertainty about what the future holds.
But that's what makes sports so great, right?
Exactly.
We never know what's going to happen next, and that's what keeps us coming back for more. So keep your eye on Moon Dongju. His story is still unfolding, and it's going to be fascinating to see where it goes from here.
Absolutely. And that's a wrap for us, folks. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
See you next time.